What American does not thrill to the sight of a speeding train? The biggest thing that moves on land. Here is mass action. Today, the economic importance of the steam locomotive can hardly be overestimated. In peace and war, it ties our far-flung country together, for our commerce and industries to function. It brings us our daily food from quarters of the land and carries us on business and pleasure safely and in comfort. It has been one of the essential creators of the America we know today.
The introduction of the modern railway system marked a distinct turning point in history. These railroads were an essential part of America's development. They allowed for products as well as information to be transported across the entirety of the U.S. in a matter of days. However, the truth is, the American railroads are responsible for much more than people think. In the late 19th century, a series of violent protests broke out in Chicago that shocked the nation and left a lasting impact on history that can still be seen today. These protests were part of a larger, more powerful movement known as the Pullman Strike. The movement first began at the Pullman Palace Car Company, which was well known at the time for manufacturing luxury train cars that were used on the American railway system. However, in the year of 1893, a massive economic recession struck America, and the company desperately needed a way to regain lost profits. Conflicts first began to arise when George Pullman, the company's founder, started imposing stricter regulations on his workers in an attempt to eliminate any expenditures that were damaging the company's revenue. George Pullman believed that by creating what was known as a factory town, or a town whose entire government and economy are controlled by a single employer, he could grow his business to an even greater extent. After Pullman put the idea into practice, his workers quickly began to realize that the implementation of the factory town did not only cause increased financial strain, but it was stripping them of their basic human rights as well. Even when the company began lowering wages and laying off hundreds of workers to stay on top of the crumbling economy, the cost of living in the factory town continued to rise. The workers soon rebelled against the oppressive business practices of the Pullman Palace Car Company and inspired other mistreated laborers across the U.S. to do the same. Today, the Pullman Strike of 1894 is seen as a significant conflict in U.S. history because it transformed how American businesses operated, exposed the unfair treatment of workers to the public, and demonstrated the true power of American labor unions. George Pullman had envisioned his factory town become the model business practice for the future. He believed that by implementing a few different methods of his own, he could combat the rising problems of labor unrest and poverty. As a result, George Pullman created his factory town with a much more paternalistic approach in mind. He imposed countless numbers of laws and regulations that were meant to transform the citizens of Pullman into more productive workers. One such example of these regulations was that the housing at Pullman directly reflected the social hierarchy of the workforce. The most luxurious homes were reserved for company executives, while common laborers received whatever space was left. Citizens of the town found that every aspect of their lives was being controlled by George Pullman. As a result, his business practices were often considered unfair and even cruel to the workers themselves. Pullman justified his actions by stating, "Capital will not invest in sentiment nor for sentimental considerations for the laboring classes. But let it once be proved that enterprises of this kind are safe and profitable, and we shall see great manufacturing corporations developing similar enterprises, and thus a new era will be introduced into the history of labor." The people of the factory town, infuriated by George Pullman's excessive regulations, soon realized that by forming organized labor unions, they had a chance to overthrow him and put an end to his oppression. The labor unions first began their strike against the Pullman Company by boycotting any trains that possessed a Pullman car. However, as tensions started to rise, these peaceful protests took a turn for the worst. The workers began a wildcat strike, where they operated independently from the union. This led to violent outbursts such as the Haymarket Square disaster, where 8 people died as the result of an explosion from a bomb thrown at the Chicago police force. This event caused mass hysteria in the U.S. and drew more attention to the labor-related struggles that plagued the nation. Eugene V. Debs, the founder of the American Railway Union, stated that privately owned industry and production for individual profit are no longer compatible with social progress and have ceased to work out to humane and civilized ends. Eventually, the riots became so large that they required federal intervention. President Grover Cleveland sent in over 12,000 U.S. troops to quell the violent strikes. Cleveland's administration also appointed a national commission to study the causes of the 1894 strike. It was found that the paternalistic ways of George Pullman were part of the reason as to why the strike became so unruly. The consequences of the events at Pullman were felt for years to come. Modern businesses can look back at this period of history to ensure that the same mistakes will not occur again. Society has learned that businesses must be open with their workers as well as treat them fairly. Although the federal government would remain unsympathetic to the labor cause until the turn of the Great Depression in the 1930s, the aftermath of the Pullman strike will serve as a constant reminder as to what would occur if employers mistreat their workers. In short, the Pullman strike of 1894 is seen as a significant conflict in U.S. history because it transformed how American businesses operated, exposed the unfair treatment of workers to the public, and demonstrated the true power of American labor unions. Even today, people draw upon the knowledge of the Pullman strike to aid in the formation of new business practices. The Pullman strike will continue to serve as a tremendous example of America's desire to be free from injustice and tyranny.